Most people do not have a money problem first. They have a meaning problem. They do not know what money is supposed to do for them. So it ends up doing the worst possible job. It becomes a scoreboard. It becomes a guilt machine. It becomes a mirror for self-worth. It becomes the thing they stare at when they want to know whether they are winning at life, whether they are behind, whether they deserve to relax, whether they are safe, whether they are enough. That is too much work for money. Money was never supposed to do all that. Money is not a religion. It is not a report card. It is not your father. It is not your judge. Money is a tool. And the moment you stop treating it like a verdict on your worth and start treating it like an operating system, your whole life begins to change. That is the line I want you to keep all the way through this story. Money is not your scoreboard. It is your operating system. That is the mother line for everything I am going to say, because almost every financial mistake ordinary people make grows out of the same confusion. They believe the purpose of money is to prove that they are doing well, so they chase more, they compare more, they hide from it when it goes badly, they feel ashamed when they do not understand it. They refuse to look at it because looking feels like admitting failure. They spend in order to feel better, they save in order to feel virtuous, they budget in order to punish themselves, they buy things because other people bought them, they fear they are behind, because somebody else has a bigger house, a nicer car, more expensive jeans, a vacation in better light, or a life with better camera angles, and because money is serving as a scoreboard, it never gives them peace. A scoreboard cannot give peace. A scoreboard only gives ranking. Ranking is an exhausting way to live. That is why the first rule is simple. If money is your measure of self-worth, you can never really have enough, because there is always someone with more income, more investments, more square footage, more status, more visible ease. And if your brain has been trained to read those differences as evidence that you are behind, then the number in your account can rise for decades without the feeling ever arriving. This is one of the most important things in the source document and one of the deepest truths in modern finance. Morgan Housel says it plainly, if you do not define what a good life is for you, your mind will automatically define a good life as one with more money, because money is easy to count. It is easier to measure than being a good parent, a calmer spouse, a better friend, a wiser person, or a more content human being. Tiffany Aliche, Fe turn 51 file 0 Fe, that is why the chase becomes endless. Money is quantifiable, character is not. So people start chasing what is easiest to count. Then they wonder why they feel no calmer when the numbers move. You can become financially more successful and psychologically less stable at the same time, if the system in your mind is still reading money as a ranking mechanism instead of a support mechanism. That is a miserable way to live. I have spent enough time around wealth to know something many people do not like hearing. The rich who seem most frantic are usually not suffering from too little money. They are suffering from too much scoreboard. That is the disease. Now, once you understand this, the obvious question appears. If money is supposed to be an operating system instead of a scoreboard, what does that actually mean? It means money should help your life function, not flatter you, not sedate you, not disguise your confusion. It should help you pay your fixed obligations without panic. It should help you build reserves against bad weather. It should help you invest in the future before the future arrives. It should help you enjoy parts of life consciously without guilt, because you already know the important things are covered. That is what a healthy money operating system does. It reduces noise. It reduces guessing. It reduces shame. It replaces fog with structure. And structure is what nearly everyone in financial stress is actually missing. This is where Tiffany Aliche's part of the source becomes so powerful. She says the first step is not some exotic strategy. It is simply to write down where your money goes, not to perform morality, not to punish yourself, not to create a cage, just to stop living inside blur. She is right. Most people are overwhelmed by money because they are guessing. Money stress grows best in vagueness. It feeds on unopened statements, fuzzy habits, recurring charges, nobody remembers, weekly swipes, nobody notices, and the emotional habit of hoping the situation is somehow less bad than it probably is. Tiffany Aliche, Fe turn 51 file 0 Fe. That is why I think the first mechanism of wealth is not investing, it is clarity. You cannot improve what you refuse to see. And so I call this the money mirror. The money mirror is the act of forcing your financial life into visible form so that the guesswork ends and reality becomes usable. That is what a money list or a budget, if you prefer the old word, really is. It is not a punishment device. It is a mirror. It shows you what your life actually costs, what categories are quietly consuming your future, and whether your real issue is earning too little or spending too much. That distinction matters a great deal. A lot of naturally frugal people believe every money problem is a spending problem. It is not. A lot of naturally optimistic spenders believe every money problem is an earning problem. It is not. Reality has to answer that, and reality only answers when the mirror is clean enough to look into. Tiffany Aliche classification into bills, usage, based bills, and cash, or choice spending, is better than most budgets because it does not merely ask where the money went. It asks how much control you actually have over where it went. That is an important psychological shift. Some costs are fixed, some move with usage, some are much more elective than we like to admit. Once you see the categories, your problem becomes easier to diagnose. If most of your cash is being crushed by bills, you may have an income problem or a housing problem. If most of the excess is leaking through choices, then you have a spending problem. Those are not the same treatment plan. Feturn 51 file 0 Fe, and one of the worst habits in modern personal finance is trying to treat every patient with the same medicine. I have no use for that. A frugal person with low income does not need more shame. He needs a bigger engine. A high earner with blurred lifestyle consumption does not need more motivational quotes. He needs a smaller leak profile. The money mirror tells you which one you are. That is why the second rule is this: before you try to fix your money, diagnose whether the wound is income or spending. That one distinction would save people years of stupid effort. Now let us move to the next layer, because clarity alone is not enough. A mirror helps you see the shape of the problem. It does not yet tell you how to run the system after you see it. That is where Ramit Sethi's part of the source becomes valuable. He takes money out of the guilt chamber and puts it into 4 buckets: fixed costs, savings, investments, guilt-free spending. That is a much better frame than most people have ever been given. Because now the point is not to micromanage every little transaction forever. The point is to route money to 4 major functions and let the system do its job. Fixed costs keep the structure standing. Savings protect the near-term future. Investments protect the long-term future guilt. Free spending protects your humanity in the present. Feturn 51 file 0 Fe. That is not a budget. That is a capital allocation model for ordinary life. And it is much stronger than the old language of restriction. I call this the 4-bucket engine. The 4-bucket engine is the forward-looking system that routes money into the 4 categories that matter most, reducing the need for daily guilt and replacing it with deliberate design. The genius of this engine is not only mathematical, it is emotional. People do not fail financially because they lack the ability to subtract. They fail because the system they are using turns every purchase into a moral drama. They fail because money becomes an endless series of tiny courtroom cases. Should I buy this? Am I bad for wanting this? Can I afford this? Does this make me irresponsible? Should I feel guilty? Should I say no? Should I wait? Is this who I am now? What will this mean about me that is exhausting? Exhausted systems do not perform well. The 4-bucket engine removes much of that exhaustion because it answers the most important questions in advance. The fixed costs are covered, the savings are moving, the investments are moving, and the guilt. Free spending is not an accident or a failure. It is a category. It belongs in the design. This matters more than people realize. A financial system that does not include legitimate enjoyment is not a strong system. It is a rebellion waiting to happen. I have never believed in building wealth through permanent self-denial. Denial can produce short bursts of control. It rarely produces stable decades of good behavior. People need room to enjoy their own life if they are going to stick with the structure. That is why Ramit is right to insist that guilt-free spending belongs in the plan. The person who has a category for enjoyment is often far more disciplined than the person pretending to be above desire until desire finally detonates the whole plan. Feturn 51 file 0 Fe. That is the 3rd rule. A money system that has no room for joy eventually becomes self-destructive. And that brings us naturally to the 3rd layer of the problem: automation. Because even with the right buckets, even with the money mirror, a person can still fail if every month requires fresh heroism. Heroism is overrated in finance. Automation is much more reliable. This is where David Bach's part of the source becomes more interesting than people first realize. He talks about compound interest. Yes, and he talks about tiny daily savings turning into real money over time. Yes, but the deeper point is not just saving pennies. The deeper point is that we now live in an automatic economy Everything is trying to attach itself to your income, automatically subscriptions, delivery services, apps, monthly plans, memberships, forgotten renewals, silent charges, streaming, convenience, lifestyle creep in digital clothing. The system around you already understands automation. It simply uses it to drain you instead of build you. Tiffany Aliche 51 File 0 Fe. That is a very important insight, because once you understand that, your task becomes obvious. If the automatic economy is already taking your money, then the only rational response is to build an automatic defense. I call this the automatic moat. The automatic moat is the set of recurring low-friction financial systems that protect your money from the equally automatic systems trying to drain it away. That means recurring investments, recurring savings transfers, recurring debt payments, recurring reviews, recurring subscription audits, recurring attention directed toward your own priorities instead of everyone else. Payment portal. This is what people miss about automation. It is not simply about convenience. It is about power. The side that automates wins more often. If your spending leaks are automatic and your wealth building is manual, you are in trouble. If your wealth building becomes automatic and your spending leaks are forced into scrutiny, the whole balance of power shifts. That is why I care less about the latte moral drama than I do about the subscription economy. A $5 coffee bought consciously is rarely what destroys a person. An entire automatic ecosystem of little recurring claims, each too small to feel like a life event, is often much more dangerous because it drains not only money but attention. And attention is where recovery begins. David is also right about something many people do not want to hear. The current system strongly favors owners of real estate and productive assets. Whether one likes that or not is separate from the fact that it is true. If the structure rewards ownership, then people need systems that gradually move them from consumption toward ownership, even in very small amounts at first. That is what automatic investing apps, retirement contributions, and recurring investment flows are for. They are not glamorous, they are simply bridges from paycheck life to ownership life. Tiffany Aliche 51 File 0 Fe. The fourth rule is this. If your spending is automatic and your investing is optional, your future is being quietly sold off. That sentence may be the most important one in the whole piece. Now let us go one layer deeper, because even with clarity, categories, and automation, there is still a final place where people sabotage themselves: expectation. This is where Morgan Housel's contribution becomes indispensable, because all the tactics in the world cannot save a person whose definition of a good life keeps moving further away every time he gets closer to it. That person is not poor in the ordinary sense. He is structurally dissatisfied. And structural dissatisfaction is a terrible wealth strategy because it turns money into an endless proving ground. You do not save because you want security. You save because you want to catch up. You do not earn because you want options. You earn because you want to outrun shame. You do not spend because you love something. You spend because someone else has something similar, and you do not want your life to look smaller. That path has no finish line. Morgan's advice is not soft at all once you understand it. Define enough. That sounds gentle. It is actually ruthless. Because the moment you define enough, you take away the market's ability to keep moving your goalpost without your permission. You stop treating every richer person as evidence that your own life is lagging. You stop reading money as an abstract race you must keep winning forever. You begin deciding what peace actually costs, what contentment actually costs, what security actually costs, what a good life actually requires for you, not for the algorithm, not for your neighbors, not for the people in your phone, but for you. Tiffany Aliche 51 File 0 Fe. I call this the enough line. The enough line is the personal definition of sufficiency that prevents money from becoming an infinite comparison game. This is where many people get confused. They hear enough and think it means settling. It does not. Enough is not anti-ambition. Enough is anti-delusion. It does not stop you from wanting more if more serves a real purpose. It stops you from making the absence of more into permanent evidence that your current life does not count. That is a huge difference. People ruin themselves financially because they live above their enough line, trying to look like people whose enough line is somewhere else entirely. That is why neighborhoods ruin people. Peer groups ruin people. Instagram ruins people. Comparison eats clarity for breakfast. Once your enough line is borrowed from other people, your money system stops being a support structure and becomes a costume budget. I have no use for costume budgets. A life is not made better by being made to resemble somebody else. Highlight reel. The fifth rule is this: until you define enough, every financial win will feel temporary. Now, when you bring all four of these experts together, the real lesson becomes much stronger than the source says it explicitly. You need a sequence, not random advice, not inspirational fragments. A sequence first: the money mirror, know where the money is going. Know whether your core issue is spending too much or earning too little. Second, the four-bucket engine. Root your money into fixed costs, savings, investments, and guilt. Free spending so the system has structure. Third, the automatic moat. Automate the flows that build your future and hunt the automatic flows that are stealing from it. Fourth, the enough line. Decide what a good life actually means for you so money stops functioning as an endless ranking device. That sequence is not a collection of tips. It is a philosophy of financial adulthood. And it is much more useful than most financial advice because it does not just tell you what to do, it tells you what money is for. That matters because if you never settle that question, you can become quite skilled at money and still be psychologically owned by it. I know people who can model compound interest beautifully and still feel behind every day. I know people with immaculate budgets who are miserable because the system they built has no room for pleasure. I know high earners who never defined enough and therefore remain permanently convinced that they are still not safe. I know people who save well but do not look at their money because the old shame remains intact and the old story still says, I am bad with money. Ramit is right to attack that story. Tiffany is right to attack vagueness. David is right to attack the automatic economy draining your life. Morgan is right to attack expectation drift. Put them together and the lesson becomes almost impossible to miss. Money gets easier when it stops being personal theater and starts becoming clear operating design. That is the deeper pattern. Now I want to say something directly to the person who still feels behind. The one living paycheck to paycheck, the one buried in debt, the one avoided the statements, the one who feels stupid, the one who handed the finances to a spouse and now feels lost. The one who has made mistakes so visible that shame feels like the only reasonable response. The one who hears all this advice and thinks, fine for them, my situation is too messy. Messy situations are exactly where operating systems matter most. In fact, the worse the situation, the more you need systems instead of moods. Tiffany's tears and tissue moment in the source is painful because it is so common. People finally add it up and realize they are living beyond what their life can currently hold. That hurts, but pain is not the same as hopelessness. Pain plus clarity is often the first honest step toward recovery. Fay file cite Fay turn 51 file 0 Fay. That is the sixth rule. Feeling bad when you finally see the truth is not failure. It is the price of getting real. And once you get real, the work becomes concrete. Maybe you need to cut a category hard. Maybe you need to increase income aggressively. Maybe housing is the real problem. Maybe subscriptions are eating you alive. Maybe you need a tiny daily savings habit first, not a perfect investing philosophy. Maybe you need to redefine enough so comparison stops wrecking your peace. Maybe you need all of it. Fine, that is still better than fog. Fog never made anybody rich. Fog never paid debt. Fog never built reserves. Fog never automated a retirement account. Fog only kept people scared. Now let me give you the identity shift hidden inside the whole source. Most people think they need to become better at money. What they actually need is to stop letting money remain undefined. That is the shift from reactive spender to system designer. A reactive spender sees bills, guilt, and random urges. A system designer sees flows, categories, automatic channels, and a personal enough line. A reactive spender feels overwhelmed because every decision feels fresh. A system designer feels calmer because the important decisions were already made upstream. A reactive spender uses money to measure life. A system designer uses money to support life. That is a very different posture. And it is the only one I really trust because money, left undefined, becomes one of the most psychologically destructive forces in ordinary life. It tells you that you are behind. It tells you that you are less. It tells you that if you only had more, the hole would close. Sometimes more money helps, of course it does. But money alone rarely closes a hole created by meaning confusion. You close that hole by deciding what money is for, and then by building a system that serves that purpose. So if I were compressing everything from this source into one final operating principle, it would be this. Know what is coming in, know where it is going, route it with intention, automate the important flows, protect room for joy, define enough. then stop asking money to tell you who you are. That is more than financial advice. That is freedom from a very old kind of confusion, and that confusion is what hurts most people long before the numbers do. Money is not your scoreboard, it is your operating system. Build it well, and the rest of your life begins to breathe.